Greetings and salutations, everybody. Welcome back to episode 41 of the Snarp Fangle Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Metzger, along with a fellow who is exceptionally level-headed, even when talking about Star Wars. Ladies and gentlemen, David Reed. How you doing, David?
I'm here.
Are you ringing the humdinger?
I don't know what that means.
I don't know either. I was just curious if you had any interpretation about it. You know what I mean?
Not off the top of my head.
No.
But ringing the humdinger.
Yeah, ringing the humdinger. What could that mean?
I don't know.
I feel like it could be something like on a ship.
Yeah, maybe something. But like a humdinger is like a whopper, like a real,
like a thingamajig almost.
No, like a
that's a humdinger. Ooh, that song.
Yeah, like
a new Kendrick album. That's a humdinger.
Yeah, something that's like almost like a heavy blow.
Oh, okay.
Either literally or metaphorically. So ringing the humdinger would, I don't know.
Yeah. I'm finding it hard to find the words to say about it.
Yeah, it's a phrase. I don't think it means anything, but it's a phrase for sure.
Yeah. Well, if you have any advice for us about what a humdinger is, you can write that and any of your thoughts, concerns to snarpfanglepod@gmail.com. And let's get right into it, David.
All right.
So I don't know how I want to preface this, but I guess I'll just read and just go from there. I guess the preface would be, I was up late last night not working. I was just enjoying my free time, and I was playing a new game, and then I hopped back on Half-Life 2, playing through that, and listening to some Sean Bowles. And that kind of gave me an inspiration to write what you're going to read today. And I don't know I don't know how it's going to go, but let's just do it and see what happens of it, you know? So with that, let's start with Romans 10:20. This is New Living Translation. And later Isaiah spoke boldly for God, saying, I was found by people who were not looking for me. I showed myself to those who were not asking for me. So I kind of want to give that as a preface, because what we're going to talk about is basically looking at the culture through a Christian lens, more or less. And I just invite you, the audience, to kind of come with us on that journey. And I invite you, David, to come along with that as well. And I have a bunch of stuff written down here. I was really burning the midnight oil last night, just writing all this out. And I don't know how it goes, but this is a little how it goes. So here we go. So I'm going to start off with saying that living God, because he's a living being, a living God, and he's for living people. Okay? And the Holy Spirit, I believe, is at work awakening himself in people. Even those you'd never expect. And also it's funny because it's funny how that's happening, because I don't know any specific examples, and you can chime in here if you want, David, about this, but I've heard Thad describe it as there's been a lot of pruning, for lack of a better term, of the church this year, specifically with the church and Christianity in general and the leaders of that. But I don't have any specific examples. I've heard the term a lot, and I find it interesting how that is happening this year. Do you have any examples of that at all?
Well, I mean, pruning is cutting back of branches that are taking nutrients from the fruit-bearing branches of like, say, a tree or whatever. Jesus mentions pruning in connection to him being the true vine in which we must abide in order to bear fruit, right? So the idea of pruning in that sense would mean a cutting back of things that distract us from the Lord, or that take our energy away from serving his purposes in our life. And with that framework in mind for what spiritual pruning looks like, I would say that the experience of myself and many other believers in these past few years has been one of pruning. It seems like, you had COVID, you had economic instability,
institutional divide.
Yeah. Social unrest, all sorts of things which have sort of forced believers to refocus. Whoops, sorry.
It's okay. Take your time.
So have sort of forced believers to refocus on God, refocus on what matters, refocus on what he's calling us to do, and, drop the distractions, drop the unimportant things. We've been kind of forced into a season of pruning because if our faith is to survive the onslaught that the last 5 or so years have unleashed upon us, well, then pruning is about the only way that that would happen. So I would say, it was not really specific examples, but I would say that pruning has just been a necessity for every believer in this current age who has wanted to keep their faith strong and healthy.
Yeah, I bring it up because we've mentioned it a few times on our Snarp Fangle saga here of podcasts. And I bring it up because I always thought, like, when people would mention it, there was specific people or pastors that were like kicked out of a church or something was what my mind immediately went to. But I guess what you're bringing up is a good point in the sense of, like, there are some things I've seen where you're like, yeah, there's definitely some lines that have been drawn, some stuff that where people stood up for themselves and for the Bible and said that's not okay, and really kind of made a great effort to be led by the Holy Spirit, even when that love is sometimes tough love in a lot of ways. For those around them or those that you thought were your friends or something like that, Anyway, that's the only reason I'm bringing it up, but that's not the point of today. But I just thought I'd start with that because pruning. Speaking of pruning, I think I'm gonna take a whiff of this Polar Seltzer spiced pear cider. So speaking of pruning, I think I'm gonna crack a cold one here. And that is interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah, that's weird.
It's almost got like a sort of a cinnamon-y sort of flavor to it.
Yeah, it's
on
like
that back end.
Yeah, definitely like cinnamony, and I don't really taste a whole lot of the pear. It just tastes like maybe some sativa in here. It just says natural flavor, so it's probably just natural pear juice or something in there.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know.
It's whatever sort of essences or...
It says no juice.
Yeah.
So just flavor.
It's just flavor. Pure flavor.
Pure carbonated water for the winter season. Have you had your Sprite cranberry yet today? Anyway. All right, moving on. So I bring that up because... and just moving on. That's why. The reason why I wanted to bring it up, it came to my mind, is because I feel like a lot of the times there's dead weight when growth happens, and pruning is the part of that process. That's just how it be. But it's good to do that because you let the branch stretch out further and more growth happens. And the analogy of that is you get to reach more people that way. You refine your gifts. You learn something new in your walk of faith. I'm losing my train of thought. I'm sorry, David. My apologies to you. This pear is just so delectable. Okay, moving on. Anyway, it's part of growth. It's important. That's why it happens. Let's see. Meditation, specifically what we dwell on, what we consume, takes up a place in our minds. This is, by the way, I'm just reading from the straight consciousness of what I came up with last night. And so we'll see if it makes any sense here. Next I have God's awakening is here, I feel. It's probably been here for a while, years in fact. It's just becoming more apparent to some folks who are now ready to dive into that, meaning in their growth, in their part in life and their stake they've claimed. Specifically, like I'm 27, you're 29. So it's so we come to a point of our lives where we're like, oh yeah, I think I'm ready to like read my Bible more, for a simple explanation. But more of fact is I've kind of realized some stuff in my walk and in growing up and in maturing. And this is just some of the stuff I've observed, and I decided to write it down. So anyway. Happy late 29th birthday, by the way, David. Okay. And some things God reveals to other folks, but it's not like it's all in his time, which is perfect. I think the reason specifically why podcasts are so popular is because it's one stream of consciousness. When you look at the landscape of media, when you look at how far we've come from what worked in the 50s and 60s and 70s with TV and live television to the 80s and 90s, which did work, and now into the new age of the internet and the refinement of things and technology advancing, the old things don't always work as well as they used to.
Yeah.
I think a stream of consciousness is how I would describe a podcast. It's a stream of consciousness that's uninterrupted, long form, spilling your pure thoughts in a steady stream, even if they are well thought out or not. As we know, perception has nearly everything to do with how we interpret things. What do you get when you are perceiving things in a spiritual lens, though? The spiritual world exists, obviously, right? And so when you start seeing things through that lens, lots of things start to make sense, in my opinion. But why is it that people that are huge cultural influences are starting to see the spiritual, is my question. And this is where we're going to dive into the meat of the topic here. We have folks like Tucker Carlson, who has been made aware of the spiritual realm after a very nasty attack with a demon that he had. And for those who aren't aware, I've been linked in the doc later, David, if you want to take a look at it. But basically the gist of it is, I think it was last year, Tucker Carlson was in bed one night sleeping, and he felt this huge pain on the side of his body, on his sides. And on both sides of his body, he felt a huge, hot pain, so painful that it woke him up. And he got up. He basically realized right away this was an attack, a demonic attack, an encounter of some kind. And he went outside and he walked around a little bit, and he was kind of out of breath, kind of figuring out what's going on. Why am I in this pain? And then he realized he had a for lack of a better term, a coming to Jesus moment. And he thought, wow, this is an attack from a demon. He immediately got that sense. And that you can go on X, which is Twitter, and you can look up him discussing this in detail. I highly recommend also Sean Bowles' commentary over this. You can just type in Sean Bowles, Tucker Carlson, demon attack or whatever. And he comments over this clip. And Tucker Carlson revealed this in a documentary that he was featured in. I think it's called Christian Entities or Christianities or something like that, talking about spiritual warfare. And this is where he revealed to the world basically that this happened to him a year or so later after it happened. Anyway, he goes back inside after wandering about outside a little bit his house. And he comes in, and he mentioned that his wife and all the dogs that were on the bed sleeping as well are very light sleepers. They'll wake up to the littlest thing that happens or a little rustle. They were out like a light. They didn't wake up at all after he got up and ran out of the room, which is not normal. And he thought to himself, he's like, this is definitely something that has happened to me. And he has scars from it, actual scar marks, some claws were on his side. And something was attacking him. And this encounter with this demonic force kind of made him realize, oh, what is all of this? What does this all mean? And it made him study the Bible, in fact, and dive deep into that. And this was also happening I said it was about a year. I think it was about a year ago. But at that time, this was right after he got fired from Fox and all this kind of stuff, or around that time, whether it be after, maybe right before, something like that. But it prompted him to study the Bible and to dive deep in that. And I thought that was fascinating. So, what do you think of this, David? Just this Tucker Carlson specifically here.
Yeah.
And what does it bring to mind?
Certainly an interesting account. I'm always really skeptical about these sorts of things. Not that I don't believe that demons attack people, because obviously there are dark forces at work within this world. So not that I don't think it's completely impossible, but I'm always skeptical just hearing someone's account of something. So I don't really have any particular thoughts about it, other than I am glad that it prompted him to study the Bible. If that's the result that came out of this, then I see that as a good thing. Whether it was a demonic attack or a just some kind of vivid dream where he like scratched himself or something, who's to say? But I mean, at the same time, I think someone like Tucker Carlson, who was always a little more truth oriented than his Fox colleagues, I think he's been coming up against dark forces
in a lot of different aspects,
in a lot of different ways. So whether or not this demon attack was a literal demon attack, it certainly seems emblematic of the sorts of evil that he's been kind of confronting in the past couple of years or so.
Yeah, some of the details I forgot to mention was he sleeps on his side, so he was like sleeping on like his left side or something the whole time. So he said in his description he physically couldn't have scratched himself like that, but that was just one detail. And then another detail I believe was, you know what? I lost that other detail. I think it flew my mind.
It went.
So, but I highly recommend you seek out his account of it, because you can go on Twitter and just type it in Tucker Carlson demonic attack or demonic forces or whatever. It's a 4-minute clip. The first one I found was like a minute 30 out of this documentary they filmed with him. But the actual clip that's like the full form of it, the full story, is about 4 minutes long. Highly recommend you seek it out. And the Sean Bowles' commentary on YouTube about it. Continuing on. If there are people who, whether religious or those who aren't religious, but are on the path to discover truth, those people, I believe, are feared by Satan and demonic forces, especially when it comes to ideology. When you are trying to, for the lack of a better term, sell someone, and I'm not talking about you, David, but the general you, not you, but the general you, not like the word.
Yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I'm not accusing you of anything.
I know what you mean. Don't worry.
So, especially when you are trying to, for the lack of a better term, sell someone that you or the political party can provide a higher form of power to look up to, or when those who are hungry for power and power over others, those who see themselves as this higher power, in quotes, and they think that they know what is right and what is wrong. And when they encounter those who know and are aware of a true higher power, being God, that strikes fear into those who hunger for control over others, because they can't control someone who already knows who the ruler of their life is. You can't convince somebody to follow a path that they know is fake, versus people who are looking for guidance in that. But when you know who you are, it becomes very easy to discern that. You can still get lost. There's still ways to wander about, but it's harder for those who want to control others to control those people. What I'm basically saying is, when you know there is only one way, all other paths become obsolete. If it don't smell right, it don't smell right, David. So if you happen to live in like the Soviet Union, or Nazi Germany, Maoist China, what's the first thing they did? They went after the churches, and they took God out of the equation and made up their own rules. When God is absent in your life, there's only one thing that is take its place. It's the absence of God. And anything can fill that or try to fill that for you or the people that were in these countries. Because when those who seek to control, that means those who try to become the authority of what is true is what is not, do everything in their power to take away your freedom, they start with God because that's the most powerful thing we have against the enemy. It's not of God. It's not of God to take away people's freedom. So it's obvious those folks ain't on his side. Or it becomes quite obvious, the intention, at least. Even those who seek power and control plan out 50 to 100 years in advance to take over a culture or civilization. I'm talking about America here, everybody. That's absolutely a plan that has been set in place for America. I mean, I think there's a reason why Xi Jinping has made himself, ruler for life or whatever they call it over there, is to fulfill this plan of invading America and degrading the moral foundation and filling the universities with their ways and spreading about their rule and their thought of it and manipulating those generationally. I think it's just something to mull over, but it's not necessarily the plan. Who knows what the plan they have is. But there's very things that you'll see, like if you see the funding of a lot of Ivy Leagues universities or universities in general, if you see a lot of stuff we've seen from far left sides of the Democratic Party taking over the party and implementing a lot of different things, it becomes quite apparent where those all descend from. And that is communism, socialism, all that kind of stuff. And I kind of, before I go on and talk about Russell Brand, David, which is very random to go to that guy after talking about Maoist China, what do you think about all this in terms of China, socialism, communism, how they live over there, especially, and of course those that are avidly trying to take over control of America and to implement all of that as well?
Yeah, I mean,
before you answer, there's one more thing I forgot. I'm sorry. But I'll say it afterward. You're fine.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. I just forgot what I was going to say.
Oh.
So say your thing.
Okay, I'll say my thing. It's important to remember like how it is right now. CIA, FBI, all these folks, it's an information war is what I'm talking about as well. Not just of what's on the news, but a lot of these people have connections with that kind of stuff, and they spy on every nation. Like we spy on everybody, and so does everybody else. Like we spy on Europe, Europe spies on Australia, Australia spies on us. There's the Five Eyes program, there's FISA courts, there's folks inside the FBI and CIA that want to go after those who want freedom for America and, Trump and all that kind of stuff. Like they hate that guy. And there's lots of corruption, most importantly, in the country, and that needs to be weeded out. And I'm talking from both sides of the aisle as well, not just left or just right, but both parties, I'd say. And I don't know. This is just what I've been observing throughout the last couple of years, and this is just the observations I found that I wanted to share with you. And what do you think about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the foundations of Western society as we know it today are Judeo-Christian morality, because really, I think the sort of flashpoint for the ideas that form the West would be what you'd call the Age of Enlightenment. And the influence that these Enlightenment era philosophers had on the founding fathers is quite obvious and apparent. And the Enlightenment era philosophy itself is simply a distillation of Judeo-Christian morality filtered through hundreds of years of European history. So yeah, it's definitely attacking God is kind of the first thing you would have to do if you were to try to undermine a society built on Western values. Because once you take away God, you take away the foundation for why the West the way it is in the first place, you know? And from then you can fill that vacuum with whatever sort of ideology you want.
Yeah. The other night, me and my parents were watching the Reagan movie that came out this year. When Dennis Quaid plays Ronald Reagan, which is a very interesting choice, but he does really good in the movie. In fact, he's really good, actually. We were watching it, and this is like my age right now, your age right now. This is exactly what my parents were going through during the age we were back then. This is how old they were. And it was interesting because I was asking my dad through a lot of it because I don't know everything about Reagan. Like, in the homeschool books I grew up with, that's where the history like books stopped because I was reading a bunch of old ones from the 80s and the 90s and stuff. So there wasn't a whole lot of recent history when I was, learning about government and presidents and everything. So a lot of it's kind of spotty for me. But it was really interesting to watch because a lot of the movie focused on the stop of communism and the spread of it and, what carried over from the Vietnam War and all that kind of stuff. But Russia and the Soviet Union and all this kind of stuff and the wall. It's just all very interesting to me. And yeah, I'm sure I didn't get everything accurate, but it was really just, it made me think about it more and to think about how that still goes on today in just a different form. I mean, I think of the fall of the Berlin Wall and that kind of symbolizing a win in the culture, just in the world, I would say. But you also at the same time have stuff like NATO, which is still ongoing, which was formed together, if you read history, to be a one world government. Like that's not NATO specifically, but the United Nations and all that kind of stuff. Like that's what that intention was with FDR and all this kind of thing. From what I remember, I could be wrong. But anyway, you look at that and you look at the fall of the Berlin Wall, you look at the 90s and the rise of a lot of different things in the university, which has been cooking for a while at that point. But you see the rise of third wave feminism in the early parts of it in the 90s. And then if you follow Christina Hoff Sommers, she talks a lot about that, how during the 90s, there was a lot of rise of the third wave feminism, which if you're a feminist, I'm fine. But third wave feminism takes a different form and degrades and belittles men for the sake of, all this kind of stuff. So I won't get into it, but you see that's a factor. You then see the two towers, you see all this stuff in the 2000s and the 2010s, you see the rise of the internet, social media completely changes everything. It's just, I don't know, this is stuff that kind of stands out to me, and I don't necessarily know if it all connects, but it has to do with culture and politics, and it affects people most importantly. And it's affected me and my perception and observing this kind of thing. And I bring it up just to be aware that I feel like socialism and communism is still a big issue in today. I mean, we live in America. We're very blessed too, but there are lots of different countries out there that are under like that type of rule where it does suck. And there's very apparent corruption and apparent demonic forces at work, for lack of a better term. So that's the reason I bring it up. But I mean, and that's in Germany. When they were going after the churches to start off with, they added 2 commandments to the 10 commandments. And the first one that they added was I don't remember, but it was like, you must obey the Führer and all he says or something. And then the second one was, you must like love the mother country or something like that, or obey the mother country. Something like that.
Interesting.
So you might be thinking I'm crazy. You might be thinking that I'm off my rocker. But I was never on one anyway, so who cares? But I don't know. It's just some things I've heard. maybe not all of it accurate, but it makes me think about it. And I don't know. Am I turning into Alex Jones, David? I don't know.
I don't know. It's tough to say.
It's tough to say. So let's.
I think we have a little Alex Jones inside each and every one of us.
Continuing on, I want to bring up Russell Brand here. You're talking about the dude from Forgetting Sarah Marshall is now an avid Christian and preaches the good word, and just wow. Like, I can't believe the journey that guy's been on. Like, a man that came from a culture of debauchery and godlessness in Hollywood is now speaking out against the fringe wackos that hosted America's path through the pandemic, and is trying to find answers to the questions he has, both in the physical or political and in the spiritual. And I think it's really beautiful with Russell Brand specifically is because he's on the search for truth. And he got a lot of crap, especially during pandemic times, where, you know, he was deplatformed a lot of ways. He went to Rumble as well. I think he lost his YouTube channel for a brief moment. I could be proven wrong, but I think that happened. And he just got a huge pushback, and a lot of people walked away from him. But I feel like he's gained so much through all of this. I mean, he's married with kids now. He was on the stage with Tucker Carlson. You see him hanging out with RFK and JD Vance and all these folks. And it's really interesting that, and he even prayed over the election at one of the Tucker Carlson talks, which was really cool to see. And even if you're not a Christian or anything, like, these are positive forces, I believe, in our country, and specifically Russell Brand. Like, he's doing it for the better. He's not doing it for himself at all, from the sense I get. Like, I don't know if, I think he passes the sniff test with flying colors. Like, I don't think he's out to do it for himself or to get rich at all. If he wanted to get rich, he would stay in Hollywood, first off. But he rose up and spoke out against a lot of things during a time where it was very hard to not stay quiet. So I don't know. I like him a lot, but before I go back to you, David, I'm going to bring up the next one, and that's Joe Rogan. So we have Joe Rogan, the average Joe who's obsessed with DMT. I mean, what can be said about him that hasn't already been said, right? You know, but I will say this, he is clearly on the path to being saved, in my opinion. Whether it be later or sooner, doesn't matter. I think he's on the path to that. And the reason is because he is obviously realizing that the truth about, aliens, in quotes, or, aliens, and his discussions about, opening the mind to find the answers to the universe, I feel like this kind of stuff is leading him down the path that will most likely be spiritual and godly. It'll be a really neat day, I think, when we see his salvation, whether it be near or far. I'm going to branch off for that a little bit and say the fact that these UNPs or UFOs or anomalies we see being talked about in congressional hearings, like, I think that's super interesting, and that's something he's been latching onto. We also have eyewitnesses bringing forth pictures and testimonials that point to viewing these beings not as extraterrestrial, but beings of the spiritual sense, explained as interdimensional beings that aren't of this reality, but of a reality beyond us. Apparently, I mean, if you go and look up some of these congressional hearings and there's a lot of stuff about the UMPs, it's really fascinating to see these testimonies from these folks. Who knows if they're doing it for clout or not, but there's pictures, there's all this kind of stuff, there's videos out, like, there's proof out there of a lot of weird things going on.
Yeah, I don't know. To me, the UFO stuff, I mean, I've always been fascinated by the idea of aliens and UFOs and all that. Yeah. But I don't know. I think the current sort of UFO frenzy, I think, not from the cultural perspective, but from the perspective of, like, the government releasing all this stuff and having congressional hearings about it. I think it's more of a distraction than anything else. I think they realize that we're on to all the shady stuff they're doing, and they're throwing out this little thing that they know is going to get people's attention. Yeah. In order to distract from all the shady stuff that they're doing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I agree with you. I feel like it's a huge distraction. I mean, there's no whatchamacallit. It's very obvious that it's made to be a distraction because during some bills, certain days that bills are being passed on the floor, certain speeches that Biden's making and bills he's trying to get passed, a lot of this UNP congressional hearings happen the same day or the day before. So it's very obvious what's happening here. I mean, if you're paying attention. However, I feel like this is a narrative with the UFOs, UNPs. I feel like this is a narrative that is leading people to having a conversation about interdimensional or other spiritual forces, specifically like about angels and demons and Jesus in general, etc. Like, heck, I mean, going back to Joe, Kid Rock in the last couple weeks almost led Joe to the Lord, like their most recent discussion together. Have you seen this conversation?
No, I haven't.
Kid Rock? So like, I watched a clip of it, and Kid Rock is like, I think he's now born again Christian now, and he's like on fire for God, which is very crazy to hear. But he is like, Joe Rogan was asking him questions like, if you had a time machine, where'd you go? And he's like, oh, Jesus, you know? And they were going back and forth. And then he asked, he's like, what, you want to go meet this Jesus? And he's like, do you want to meet him, Joe? Like, he like said it like a couple times, like, you can meet him too. Like, we can talk about that. And he kind of like deflected him. It's like, no, let's focus on the question, you know? But I thought it was funny because it's like, holy cow, this guy, he like nearly got, you know, the conversation started with Joe, like, hey, you know, you want to meet the Lord, you know, that kind of thing. I just think it's funny. I don't think there's any huge weight to it. I just see it happening and I'm like, oh, that's something I never would figure that would happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
The only thing is, unfortunately, Joe Rogan is a strange character.
Strange bald character.
I mean, we all compartmentalize. That's just a thing that humans do. But he does it to such an absurd degree,
yeah.
I think. So he's very truth oriented in certain things.
Yeah.
And certain things he fights tooth and nail to keep the blinders on.
And I think he does that because what makes me think of this is the last one he did with like Alex Jones, or not last one, but a couple back, where he had him and Eddie Bravo sit down and they were talking, and like, he's basically shutting Alex Jones down at every level. And because of that, you know, obviously because of YouTube's policies and stuff like that. And they were doing that live, I think, too. So obviously he's like, no, where's the proof about this? And Jeremy, you should look this up and blah, blah, blah. And Alex is like, interdimensional demons and child rapists and all this kind of crazy stuff. Like, and it's like, I see him put on the blinders for a lot of that stuff because I think he's worried about being carried away by conspiracy theories and being carried away by those that would stop him from being grounded in his own mind. But well, I feel like, I don't know. What do you think? I
think I'm talking more about spiritual stuff too. I just think he's got a long work to go before he can start to see the truth about God. Not to say that he's not on the path or that it's not going to happen, but yeah, he's got some major obstacles to overcome as far as truth about God, truth about the Bible is concerned.
For sure.
Like major obstacles.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I've talked to people about this and just throughout the years, and I mean, it's a whole paradigm shift. Like, it's going to be painful, obviously. Excuse me. But I would say that it's interesting to see these things because they're little bits and pieces of he seems to be on the right path, you know? And of course the devil can come swat that out of the way, but also it'd be cool to kind of, I don't know, it could be on his deathbed. Who knows? But I feel like whether he publicly states it or not, or kind of wants to talk about it publicly, I feel like he's processing some things and that he is on the path as we've established. I just don't think it'll be in the near future. I think it'll be off, but I feel like it's on its way. Prayerfully, I pray for his heart, you know. But
yeah, that's the only thing we can do.
Yeah.
Yeah, Joe Rogan is one of those things where it's like he's so on the money about certain things, And then about other things, he's just like, the truth is right in front of his face, and he's like, nope, not gonna look at it. So it's one of those things where it's like, man, you're so close and yet you're so far away, Joe.
Yeah. Well, that makes me want to bring up like the fellow you and me have talked about with Last Stand Media, David Jaffe, and how I remember I talked about him on the last episode we did with Thad, the Drunk Frogs episode we talked about. But I brought up, and I totally forgot to say my point about it when I was listening back to that episode, because I said, yeah, David Jaffe, it's like he's doing something. It'd be cool. It'd be awesome to see his heart saved. But what I mean to say is, yes, it'd be awesome to see his heart saved. But also, he seems to be one of those folks that might be on the path to truth and seeking out truth and seeing out different opinions. But I feel like he's going to get in the way of himself. And I feel like Joe Rogan's a little similar in the sense of, I think the only way you can reach somebody's heart is for them to be open about it. And if they're going to close their heart off to that, that's up to them and their choice. But wouldn't it be cool, man, for folks like that to be saved? Because imagine what they can do for the kingdom, is what I think. But I also have to be realistic. Who knows if it'll happen?
Yeah.
But with God, all things are possible, but it's up to their heart.
And, sometimes God works miracles in ways we don't expect,
Mm-hmm.
And like, you say, imagine what someone like Joe Rogan could do for the kingdom, but it's like, it's also when you're talking about what someone can or can't do for the kingdom of God, like what they are or are not in the natural doesn't really have anything to do with that. I think that's helpful to, not that I wouldn't like to see Joe Rogan saved, but I think it's just helpful to remember in these discussions that just because Joe Rogan is a massively influential podcaster, that doesn't mean that he is like specially anointed for kingdom work in a way that, your average person is not. When it comes to anointing, when it comes to following the path that God has for your life, what you are in the natural, especially what you were in the natural prior to coming to faith in Christ, that doesn't matter so much. But yeah, but that is to say that, yeah, Joe Rogan being a Christian would be a big deal.
Yeah. I would also argue that I think he's done a lot for the kingdom, actually.
Well,
through the different conversations he has, the people he's had on, and I think God can speak through anybody.
Yeah,
but I'm not saying to look toward him as your savior.
To say that he did that is God did that.
Correct.
Yeah,
yes.
And Joe Rogan was not a willing participant in that.
No. But I feel like God can work through a lot of different folks.
Yeah, God can. God's God. He can do anything. He can do whatever he wants. So I think it's just important to remember that when we're talking about, like, Joe Rogan could do so much for the kingdom. It's like the only kingdom work that matters is the kind that where the power comes from God in the first place. The idea of working in human strength or in the natural or in the flesh to try and advance the kingdom is a non-starter for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know, it's just something I thought I'd bring up because the next person we're talking about is somebody is Elon Musk. Is one I want to bring up because he says he respects the teachings of Jesus publicly and he considers himself, in quotes, a cultural Christian, but I feel like him and Richard Hawkins have done that too. And I'm not saying they're Christian at all. I'm just saying, like, there are things that they are realizing and they're willing to talk about openly. And that's not a positive thing, I think, in their minds in terms of like publicity wise. But I feel like these people are like beyond that. Like Elon Musk is beyond having to play nice with the media. He can say literally whatever he wants. He has, for lack of a better term, FU money. He does have that. He has X and all this kind of thing. But this was even before the election took place where he was interviewed and he said, I believe Jesus was a wise man. And yeah, that's cool. It's not salvation, but I feel like it's in the step in the right direction. And that's why I wanted to bring up Joe Rogan as well. I feel like he's on the step in the right direction What God will do with that is yet to be revealed, but I feel like we will see whatever will be revealed later. I don't know. That's just something I've noticed. But let me transition into what is fascinating about these folks, David. Like, why is it that they resonate with so many people, you may ask? And I have one simple answer. It's because they seek truth. Them, along with many, many people out there, are starting to realize there's more to this earth than meets the eye. Some won't listen to a pastor. Some won't listen to a left or a right wing. Some won't. Some of them just enjoy the DMT talk. But these people I brought up before, Russell Brand, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, whoever else I brought up as well, I can't remember. But the one thing they have in common is they desire and hunger for truth. And when they start on that path, it will inevitably lead to God, in my opinion. And I could be totally wrong, but that's just what I've noticed. And then I think specifically, to get more specific about it, God is lining up some things within these people, because these people are the messengers to our culture. Whether like people out there like them or not, or disagree with them or not, I mean, there's plenty of things I disagree with with a lot of these people, I would say. I don't know specifically, like, I can't give you specific examples in terms of that, but I've heard their talks of politics or their opinions on culture, and I have disagreements, like, genuinely. But they are making a huge impact on this culture. And I believe God is utilizing their gifts and speaking into their lives as they start to realize that He is real. Minds have been changed, but the heart is the next step. And, sometimes it's not the right time. The soil in your heart, the soil, oh man, I wrote this and I have totally world saladed it, so I'm trying to piece it together. Basically, there's good soil, there's bad soil, there's fertile soil, and there's non-fertile soil. But I think it's good to point out that there are, kind of like Pastor Nick was saying in his sermon today, fertile soil, bad things can grow in fertile soil. And I never really thought of it that way. That's not necessarily how the Bible translates that parable. But fertile ground is fertile ground, and whatever you plant in it, in my mind, would grow in it. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I think when he said that, he was talking, not necessarily making a one-to-one connection with the parable of the sower, but just talking about fertile soil as a metaphor for having an open heart. And just the idea that you could have an open heart, but what is your heart open to? Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So if your heart is just open to whatever, then whatever can come in and take root in there. But if you're careful what you let in your heart, then only the things you allow in will take root in there.
And that's why seasons, most importantly, David, are important. And specifically seasons in time, in congruence with God's timing. Can you imagine if you were like in a rainstorm and you were like using your hoe and you were, building rows in your soil and getting ready to plant stuff? That in the middle of a rainstorm, like, that's not the great time to do it, right? It's all, you gotta discern the season and the season you're in, along with God's timing and how He's going to use that, because God has a plan. And His timing is so beautiful and just right, from what I've learned in my life. Like, it's so perfect in every single way. And everything with time, most importantly, in His perfect timing. You see what I'm saying? Like, you wouldn't go out and plant in the middle of a rainstorm. You wouldn't, let's see. You wouldn't go out and get your harvest basket ready when the soil's out there dry and dusty, right? There's this time and a season for each thing. And I don't know, that really hit a mark with me recently. And I just wanted to share it with you and all the fangles out there. So, because obviously the people we've talked about aren't ready yet, but maybe they will be eventually. And I feel like there's some work being done in their lives spiritually, whether they realize it or not. And I think whether we realize it in ourselves or not, I feel like there's work that God is doing in the background and foreground of our lives that sometimes we're not paying attention.
Yeah.
And whether it be caused by seeds that were planted in the past, that God is working his will in it, or the prayers of others that have prayed over our lives and God working in that.
Yeah. I would say, though,
I don't know. What do you think?
that I think the reason why so many people are attracted to people like Elon Musk, people like Rogan, people like Russell Brand is because the times that we live in have just forced people to become either truth seekers or truth deniers. There's not really a middle ground, so to speak, in our culture anymore. You're either seeking truth or you're in a place where you're actively trying to deny truth, stop truth.
Yeah.
And so I think many people in our culture who would have sort of just kind of been drifting through life, not really seeking truth in any particular way, have been sort of forced into a position of, okay, I either have to swallow the lie and or I have to seek the truth. And so a lot of people have become sort of unwilling truth seekers in our culture. And so I think that's why people who have large platforms who also have become truth seekers are popular. And so I think it's very significant that these people have become truth seekers, but not necessarily because it's about them in any specific way. I think it's significant more so because they're emblematic of the wider culture that now it's kind of, you're either a truth seeker or you've already swallowed the lie.
Man, you're reading exactly from my notes, man. Like, I don't say it just like that, but you're basically reading my notes, bro. So, but I love that. That's a great way to say it. So, all right. So, continuing on. Did you have anything else or?
No.
Okay. So continuing on, some might wonder, what's the obsession with all these people? You're probably yelling at me, Fangles. It's the algorithm, Jake! It's the YouTube rabbit hole! That's why they're freaking obsessed with these folks! Because it pushes them to the top! Well, not necessarily. Okay? David just established there are people who seek out truth, who will go beyond what's recommended on YouTube, that will go and they will type in something. But also, it's a tool. You got to use it right. Be careful. Discernment's a good thing. Anyway, I'll give you a simple answer. And it's basically what David said. I think people are looking for guidance because we live in just a very broken society. A failed civilization, in fact. But the thing is, there's always hope. And people always have that hope, whether they realize it or not. And what's beautiful about God's grace is that there is grace for that. So what I'm saying is that it's mostly, for lack of a better term, it's mostly also, I'm not trying to be like misogynistic here. I'm just being like, truthful here, because mostly it's men who's seeking out a lot of this content, to be real. And men who are looking for guidance, looking for this truth, who are also hardwired not just as men, but as human beings, that when justice is served, we have a visceral reaction to that, and we seek justice as well. And we have a positive reaction to it. So when you see a father and his family with his wife and kids, when you see that old guy, when you see a guy like me who dreams about having that one day, when you see older men thinking about what they're going to do next in life, when you see somebody who's leading a church or leading his fellow brother, they're going to be looking for guidance. And the best way to find it is in the Word. But not everybody's going to pick up the Bible. But they'll listen to Joe Rogan. They'll listen to Lex Friedman, and they'll listen to the Dry Creek Wrangler School on how to be a man, you know? People are hungry for guidance, and most importantly, truth. And these men are all on the lookout for truth. And when you're on the path for truth, it's probably going to lead you to one logical conclusion, which is Jesus, given the right ingredients, I would say. And it's also important to remember that a man is the leader of the household for a reason. Because if there ain't a good man, okay, so I wrote this as in, if there ain't a good person, it's this. I'm going to change the word for, you know, here's the thing. I say ain't a good person. I'm going to say if there is a good person instead. So continuing on, because if there is a good man in the house, there's most likely going to be a good marriage. And if there is a good marriage, there is most likely going to be a good family. And when there's a good family at home, there's most likely going to be a good family at the church. When there's, or at least the family in that church is good. And when the good family is at the church, then there's a pretty good chance there's a good church. And if there's a good church, there's a good society, or good to come out of the society. And when there's a good society, evil has a much harder time taking it over, is what I'm saying. So,
yeah. I want to say one thing real quick. I'm all for the patriarchy.
I'm just saying how it is. But continue.
I'm all for the patriarchy. Believe you me. Believe you me. But I think what we're actually seeing in our culture is the result of men being disenfranchised by the dominant ideology. So you hit on third wave feminism, and that's had a lot of impact on our culture. And because of the impact that has had on our culture, a lot of men are feeling lost and confused and disenfranchised, feeling like they no longer have a role to play, feeling like they no longer have a path forward in life. And you see this in a lot of different aspects of life. But that's what has led us to this place where you have this sort of entire generation of men who are now have become truth seekers because they don't have the luxury of swallowing the lie, because the purveyors of the lie have already cast them off and said, you're not worthy.
So you're saying they found a home in a lot of this stuff?
Yes, okay. yes. So I think what you're seeing is an entire generation of men who've been cast off by society as a whole, and now have no choice but to seek deeper truth in order to have some sort of meaning in their life.
And I think it's evident because you know what I think of when you say that is, yes, there's a lot of positive folks we've talked about with that, but there's also a lot of negative folks, I would say, that have taken advantage of that audience, in quotes, for lack of a better term. I think of Fresh and Fit podcast. Have you ever heard of those guys? The two Miami bros that talk about women and dating and how to be a man.
I've heard the name, but I don't really know anything about them.
Basically, they tell this is how you treat a woman right, and this is how you get all the the B words.
Oh, yeah,
that's what they're like, the manosphere.
I know exactly what that kind of thing is.
Yeah. So I used to follow them for a period of time, and then I just started to realize like these guys are just self-righteous and very selfish, and all they care about is themselves. I did see Myron, one of the main guys, on Timcast recently. And I'm like, oh God, it's Myron. Okay. Cause I unsubscribed from them like years ago. And I was like, all right, let's hear what he says. But it was interesting because he used to be like I think a FBI informant, and he used to work for the FBI. So he brought that aspect to like the border policies that are being implemented by the new administration coming in. He was able to comment on that and his experience with being working at the border and everything. I thought that was really cool. But anyway, there's people out there that will take advantage of this and try to be like, how to get old you know, like
Yeah.
Andrew Tate is another one I would recommend. I would not recommend at all.
Are you saying?
No, don't clip that. I slipped. Okay, I meant to say Andrew Tate, who is somebody I would not recommend, is another example of that, where he's part of this, like, this is how you get it in your life, and this is how you get all the women. And it's like, dude, shut up. Like, I've seen enough of this fella where, again, it's selfish, it's self-motivated, a lot of it seems only for money. I'm not accusing him of that. I'm just saying that's the behavior he exhibits, as well as the fresh and fit folks. The behavior they exhibit come off as immature, self-seeking, and making money, and that's about it. Just from the behavior and the fruits of their labor is what I'm saying. So it's important to realize those are the kind of folks that the articles you read about the manosphere is a disaster. And these young men are seeking, this is the kind of folks they're listening to. And just hear what they have to say. They're so misogynistic and all this kind of stuff. And they bring out these bad apples as examples, and they lump them in with like a Joe Rogan and stuff. And it's like, come on, that's not fair.
I mean, that's just part of the whole
that's a part of the
casting off and disenfranchisement of young men. Is they're hopping on the worst of the worst to try and basically paint this entire movement of men seeking truth as something to be ridiculed. Because the problem is with this large movement of young men seeking truth for the first time in their lives is people notice. It's not a small thing. And that can be dangerous to the people who have already swallowed the lie, That can be dangerous in that they're in danger of having the lie exposed. They're in danger of the lie unraveling, and the people who are the purveyors of the lies don't want that to happen, so they pile on with the attacks like that. To try and keep the people who have swallowed the lie to keep swallowing the lie.
Yeah, I've seen also those kind of folks that really take that manosphere and also apply it to people like Logan and Jake Paul and say, this is the kind of men that are being brought up in our society. Is this the kind of men you want brought up in our society? It's like, don't lump us in with those guys, okay? Please don't. They were a bunch of folks that got YouTube money and then got big and were very savvy businessmen, by the way, in some aspects, but also made a bunch of stupid decisions. I mean, just think of the cryptocurrencies they're trying to push, you know? However, I do think there's some good that can come from like a Logan Paul and Jake Paul, but I would not lump them in with the good folks we've talked about already, you know? So people want to get their bag. They want to sell you some Prime. They want to sell you their Doge coins, you know, or the S coins, you know, that we know of. You know, I don't think Doge is that. I still have a ton of Doge I never sold. I gotta sell that. So guys, please buy some more Doge for me, you know, get that price up so I can sell it. Thad, I think we should talk about this next time with Thad on because of the Doge saga, because that was fun. Because I bought some Doge. I put probably an unhealthy amount of money. Not like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, but enough where I'm like, I probably could have spent this wiser, you know?
Yeah.
I could probably get good money for it now. I haven't checked the price in forever, but that's just a side thing. So
yeah.
Did you ever buy any Doge, David?
I did actually, but
did you sell it?
I sold it. I made a profit, but I sold it not the wrong time, but the not quite right time. So I missed when it jumped up huge. I missed that mark, and I could have made a much larger profit than I did. But I was like, I'm going to hold out for a little bit longer.
That's what I kept doing.
And then as soon as I did that, it started going down. So
sell.
I did make a profit off of it, but not as much as I could have.
Yeah, I remember me and Thad hopped in super early, super early. Like I'd put like $80 in here and then $20 in here at this point. And I bet if I sold it now at whatever it's at, it's probably up from whenever it started. I'd probably make a profit, maybe like a 10 or 20% profit, but I'm just waiting, man, waiting to cash my Doge in on a rainy day. You know what I mean? Especially if there's going to be a Doge department in the government. Maybe that'll make the price go up. But anyway,
oh my gosh,
I don't advise it. We're not financial advisors on here, by the way. So just take that with a huge grain of salt. Don't listen to David about buying. Don't listen to Jake specifically about buying cryptocurrency.
Yeah, take that with the largest, just absolutely mammoth grain of salt you can find. Imagine like a grain of salt like the size of Mount Rushmore. That's what we're talking about here. Very large grain of salt.
So large. Anyway, huge. Moving on. What else do I have written here? I have a bit more. So here we go. So information and information control. We live in a society. Yeah, we put it in there. That runs on information and who controls it. I had to sneak that in there. And the beautiful thing about the internet is that it provides a sense of freedom. Holy crap, I'm running out of my battery. And the beautiful thing about the internet is that it provides a sense of freedom where you can actually say pretty much anything you want in certain places. And those places are going to thrive because people are going to seek out that raw, unfiltered thought process. YouTube for a long time wasn't that. It was that, and then it wasn't. But I think, I don't know about you, David, but something is changing from what I've seen in YouTube where they aren't suppressing as much. I noticed that they aren't so bullish on their Wikipedia or Associated Press listings. They'll still have them there, but they'll only have them on like certain videos. It won't be like the election's undecided or anything. It'll be like, no, this is actually the facts. Like, this is what's happening, you know? So, or this is hearsay. Like, I've seen that in a couple stuff back in 2020. I saw that on a couple podcasts as well. But anyway, I haven't noticed that much of it this time around. So that's, I think, a good sign, but I'm not saying it's heading in the right direction, but I'm seeing less of it, which is interesting. I've noticed that they aren't so bullish on that kind of thing. Meaning like, oh, I already explained that. I'm just saying there's less of it now. It's still there, but much to lesser extent. I don't know. The reason for that is my sneaky gut suspicion is that they know they're going to get in trouble and with people specifically, just the public. And as a result, less people will come to their platform. I also think it's a way of competing with X in a way, which is allowing pretty much anything on there that's reasonable in terms of reasonable moderation, with very much huge exceptions, by the way. There's still a lot of issues with X. I also think, in fact, they've recently, X specifically, have made another push to get rid of a lot of the porn on the website. But overall, which is good, but there's still a lot of issues with X in general. But overall, I think YouTube has been put in a position by Twitter or X where they need to accept free thinkers like Tucker Carlson, Russell Brand, because that's where the people are going to get their information from. Same thing with Joe Rogan. And where I want to go from there, David, is another kind of side topic, but that's pretty much all I have written here. That's the main part of it. And basically what I'm getting to is there are people who are seeking truth, and there are folks out there that are speaking the truth, and like minds find each other and they discuss it and they follow each other. I mean, same thing if in the public square back in the whatever times, maybe the Enlightenment era, where a lot of those discussions were happening. I'm not saying we're in that, but I'm just saying that's like that in terms of seeking truth. And I think it's interesting how there's a lot of spiritual stuff happening. I feel like people are they're hungry for truth, and they have been for a while now. And I feel like it's leading to somewhere. And I feel like it's important as Christians for us to realize that, because what are we going to do to help further the kingdom's work and the work God wants done within us, and how we can do that to obey him and do what he wants us to do in our lives. So what do you think of all this? What do you think of maybe potentially the behavior of one platform is affecting the other? How, yes, the folks that are popular are also the folks that are sometimes the middle of the road, as well as they're very careful of obeying the YouTube rules and as a matter of fact, they're staying on YouTube. I think I've seen some YouTubers like Louder for Crowder, for example, has just been only on Rumble. Maybe they'll do a live show on YouTube every once in a while and put clips on there, but mostly it's on Rumble. In fact, they have a deal now where if you get Rumble Premium, you get Mug Club and all that kind of stuff, which is like $10 a month. So I just find it interesting, but they gave up on YouTube because the push was so strong against them versus others like Timcast that kind of rode the line and kind of obeyed the rules and made sure they were still there. And as a matter of fact, they're bigger than ever now. It's crazy. And I feel like there's different business ventures in that, but I'm just getting in the weeds at this point. But what do you think of all this? What do you take away from that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things where social media is a tricky landscape to navigate. And I'm not like, some people are much better at, exist like working within a framework, of like what you can say and what you can't say than other people are, and that just depends on personality. Yeah. So someone like Timcast is like, I'm not going to say he's like necessarily a bad person or anything, but he clearly is more comfortable with not upsetting the apple cart too much, so to speak.
Yeah.
Whereas someone like Crowder,
he's willing to rock the boat.
Yeah, he can't help but be a boat rocker. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, he's the guy who's singing that song in Guys and Dolls. He is rocking the boat.
Yeah.
Well, no, he's not rocking the boat because he's not the guy singing it. Because in the song, I don't know if
he's the one.
If you don't know this about Guys and Dolls, David, I didn't know if you know this, but in Guys and Dolls, which is a musical, do you know this, David?
What?
Guys and Dolls, the musical.
I've heard of it, but
like
I hate musicals.
I know, but
my knowledge of it is limited by choice. I know that it exists, and I am content in not knowing more about it than the fact that it exists.
I'm just messing with you. I'm just messing. I was just joking. I was like, did you know? Ooh, it could be like our two films. Be like, oh my God, I'm gay. Anyway. Yeah, I think it's interesting because here's the thing with Timcast. It's interesting because they use the moderation, in fact, to advertise, which is super smart, to advertise their members only kind of segment of their show daily. Like at 10 p.m. Eastern, they'll cut off from YouTube after 2 hours and they'll do like 45 minutes on their website. And I've found some really interesting conversations that way. I've actually subscribed to them and looked at some of that stuff and really interesting stuff, especially the Inverted World series with Shane Cashman, which he also did books about the supernatural and the spiritual and all that kind of stuff and the ghost stories especially, and how all that kind of basically telling ghost stories and finding people in this country that does that. But anyway, I feel like business-wise, that's a really smart move for them. And I also think it's interesting for Crowder because now he's like in the Rumble boat, basically. And he is like, he's on the ship and he's like captain of the ship, basically. Like, he's like probably the biggest person on that platform. I don't really like Rumble very much. They're not a very like usability wise and user friendly in terms of like the app, the website. It's just not like YouTube. So I'm kind of like, I don't want to touch it. It's not what I'm used to, So, but it's cool that they're out there. It's just the issue they're coming into is that they're so focused on being where all the rejects go that it's kind of just ruled by the rejects and there's no room for nuance. Maybe not. That's not the right word. Maybe there's not enough room for folks that do casual content on there. I feel like that's a huge thing because there's a lot of folks like Jeremy from the Courting, for example, who really advertises Rumble and is like really pushing it and has like, and is willing to help out folks transition to that platform to make it as easy as possible to just, you push a couple buttons and you got stuff on YouTube and Rumble at the same time. Easy stuff. He's into IT and does that kind of thing. However, what's the goal of it if you're not going to get the reach or the pay that YouTube provides.
Yeah.
Because everybody's on YouTube. So it's kind of hard not to be on there. I believe that, I don't know, I've been struggling with this. I want to hear what you think about this, but especially with our Snarp Fangle stuff. Right now we're all on YouTube. We want to get to audio eventually. That will come all in due time. But do we, and we talked about this before, like going to Rumble, going to Odyssey, going to
BitChute.
yeah, BitChute, who knows? Vimeo, I don't know. But
Vimeo.
But it kind of tangles back into like our conversation of being tactful that we had on Sacred versus Secular. Our discussion with that, like we have to be more tactful as reaching out to the culture. So is it smart to just spread out as far as we can and basically whatever sticks? Or is it more, should we be tactful and strategic about, okay, I'm going to go on Rumble, but I'm not going to go on Odyssey. Or I'm going to go on Blue Sky, but not on X. You know, it's like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, what we do is, I mean, it's up in the air.
What we do, you know?
It's up in the air at this point. 'Cause
Yeah.
it's like right now for the foreseeable future, it's like, you know, we do YouTube now.
Yeah, we do. Yeah.
That's what we do.
That's what we do.
So in order to even like entertain the idea of like, you know, what else will we do is we have to like, we would involve making the decision to do something other than YouTube.
Yeah.
And, you
and
know,
also right now it's also up to bandwidth too. Like you and me work, we have other stuff that's more important in our lives. We live our lives, you know, we don't spend all the time editing or recording and stuff like that. We just pick some times that work for us and for other people and we just do it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like we're out to make money. But what we are trying to do is to just enjoy what we do making and kind of figure it out as we go. I don't know about you, but that's how I've kind of seen it, you know, and have fun while doing it. You know, I'm having some fun while doing some of this stuff. That's for sure. You know, when David doesn't respond, then I don't have much fun, you know. I'm joking, but I don't know. It's something I've thought about. I've thought about how to cultivate an audience, how to manage that. And it's something that's passed my mind, especially looking at people like Jeremy of the Quartering and the kind of content he produces and the kind of people he kind of holds on to with this content. And I just don't know if I also see other examples too in like Tim Cass and all this other stuff. Like I go back to what Thad says in terms of politics. If you're a pastor or whatever, I think he said something like, just pick a lane, bro. Like just be honest, you know, but also be aware that, you know, sometimes you can't always say the latest political news. That's not what the pulpit's for. It's not talking about politics. It's about preaching the word and being there for others and showing them God's love. But I just think that as Christians, as the spiritual folk, I guess, I don't know, you have to be tactful in the way you deliver the message.
Yeah.
But I don't know. What do you think of all this and stuff like that? Because I'm not trying to say we're going to do it where we have to be tactful because what if we get canceled? No. We have to be tactful because we don't want to let the enemy like take advantage of it.
I mean, it all just comes down to, you know, you steward everything in your life.
Okay. Yeah.
So stewarding your communication is just another thing that is wise to do, you know? Yeah, I agree with you. We're always careful in how we communicate, but the things we don't communicate aren't things we're afraid to say. Things we don't communicate are things that we've decided it's wiser to spend our energy communicating other things instead.
I think energy is the key point there. Like, I think that's actually one of the best things. Like, I think that's actually, I don't know what I'm saying. I think energy is the right word to use, is what I'm saying. Because you don't want to, like, oh, I'm going to talk about this director drama that's happening in Hollywood because I find it interesting just for the sake of it. No, like, you kind of want to not just talk about just anything. You kind of just want to talk about what your authenticity brings. You know, if it's inauthentic to talk about that stuff, don't talk about it. You know, if it's authentic, it's just cool. It's a conversation you want to talk about your buddy about, cool, whatever. But I think stewarding is also the other word I want to attach onto, because stewarding your community is kind of also steward, like it's a balance. Like I know folks that don't talk about politics, they don't want anything to do with it. Totally understandable. I also see folks who talk about politics and video games and all this kind of stuff, and it gets a lot of likes. But I'm also like, well, I'm not about getting likes. I kind of just want to talk about what I'm interested in and see like-minded people. I think like-minded people is the thing where is the thing, I don't know, that comes to my mind. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we talk about the things that we talk about because it relates to who we are authentically. And yeah, I think there's wisdom in, like, I don't, like, not that I have anything against someone like, you know, Crowder or something,
Yeah.
but like, you know, somebody who just, like, I prefer to be someone who can, who knows what to say and what not to say and the right time for each, you know.
Yeah, and
rather than someone who just spews information out and hopes something sticks, you know.
you know, it's funny, we were talking about before the pod, we were talking about Denzel Washington and Gladiator 2 and all this. And it's funny because I saw a piece of an interview where somebody asked him about his generation and how he feels about the current generation growing up. And Denzel is I'd say a very wise man in a lot of stuff I've seen him say. And he said something very poignant to me where he said something to the extent of his generation that brought up this generation and the next as well, like millennials and Gen Z and all that kind of stuff, as well as X. And he talks about how that generation brought in this technology and all these generations have brought into the next one, right? And he kind of was like, man, I'm sorry that we did this to you guys, because now we have social media, we have this polarization, and a lot of folks are disenchanted because of the technology. And I see that and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. And I think it's cool for him to say that. But also I feel like with the folks who grew up with the technology are now starting to realize that there's far more nuance to it. And there's far more strategic ways to say your message is what I'm saying. Another point I want to bring up, I don't know how much I want to talk about it, but I think seeing grace in the culture is also important. Specifically, I want to bring up, and this is kind of sort of internet drama, but I want to bring up for a specific reason. I want to talk about like Nala Ray. I think we've talked about her before on here, where she was the OnlyFans chick.
Yeah.
And then she left it. She got baptized. She got saved, and then she deleted her OnlyFans. Is now kind of going on a little podcast tour talking about her salvation. I saw her on Lecrae. I think I sent it to you. It was really, really good about her just being open and vulnerable. And the first thing I saw her on was Michael Knowles. And more recently, and that was a really, really interesting topic. Now, there's a lot of folks out there that I see that really like trash on her and say, what if she's not telling the truth? What if she's doing this for a grift or something? You know, that word's lost its meaning in modern day Twitter and age and social media landscape. But I see people's reaction to that. And I see, well, look, like we all make mistakes and can't we forgive them? But then most recently there was a clip going around. She was back on the Whatever podcast and she was talking about very much a different person at this point versus the last time she was on. And there was a clip that was going around about her saying basically like the exact phrase was, everything I said was a lie on the podcast I was on when I was going on all these podcasts. And people took that and clipped that and started spraying around saying, she's lying about all the stuff she's doing right now. It's crazy. She's not a Christian. But in the real context of that clip, I'd suggest you go find out Michael talking about this because I saw it on Twitter first off. And I was like, oh, wait, I just saw people talking about it. I didn't actually watch the clip from the podcast. And she was basically saying the same thing she was talking about with Lecrae, like, hey, turn away from sin. I got saved and all this kind of stuff. And just encouraging people to follow that and to turn away from the godless life. And I thought that was really beautiful. And in this clip, she basically said that, but in the context of before she got saved, before she deleted her OnlyFans. The clip that was going around was specifically leaving that out, painting her as this hypocrite and saying how she's lying to all the Christian folks she's talking to, like Lecrae, like Michael Knowles, can't remember who else she was on. But I thought that was really fascinating because I'm like, dang, people will just take any little thing and run with it. So I would just highly recommend everybody who's listening, do not worship any of these folks that we've talked about. Don't worship anybody just because you agree with them, and don't hold on to them like they're this wonderful unicorn. Because I remember seeing that clip going around and I'm like, man, that sucks. I was really, hoping this girl was like saying the truth and stuff like that. But then I found somebody breaking it down, Michael Knowles being the one, who also had her on the very first appearance. And he broke it down and he said, no, here's the context. He just showed the clip. Like, here's the full clip, which also cut off a conversation and a question somebody asked her about, wait, how do we not know you're lying now? And she said, well, I believe is, and she's like, well, first off, I'm telling the truth. But she also said something like, I go by the fruits of the Spirit and what people's fruits are. If they're not producing the fruits of the Spirit and the stuff that God says this is, out of the abundance the heart speaks. And if they're not producing this, then you'll know the results from their fruit, is basically what she was saying. And there was another thing that that people had issue with because she said something about the Trinity, and the Trinity is a really sensitive topic for a lot of folks, especially when you're dealing with Christians or nonconformists or the Trinity folks or non-Trinity folks, whatever. It's a very hard thing to describe, especially if you're a baby Christian. So people were giving her trouble with that because she said something like, oh, Jesus and the Holy Spirit are different, or they're the same thing, or something like that. And it's like, well, wait a second. What are you talking about? It seemed to me, why can't we have grace for that? Like, maybe she misspoke. Maybe she said something different. Like, why can't, as a culture, we have a little grace sometimes? Yes, we should be on our guard, but also treat every situation, I think, with a little grace. And also, for the folks out there, give it 48 hours. Give it some discernment. Like, give it 48 hours. Don't respond. Don't post a reply. Don't share it or whatever. Just give it some time, and then the truth eventually will come out. And then if you feel the same way after 48 hours, then respond. That's what I would recommend. But I think it's specifically grace that's missing because there's a lot of people out there.
I don't know if it's grace that's missing so much as just a lack of self-awareness. Because I don't think my take on all this hullabaloo about this person, and I've seen similar things with what's her face, the tattoo artist lady chick. Kat Von D.
Kat, yeah, I want to say Black Cat, but that wasn't right.
Yeah, Kat Von. I saw the same thing with Kat Von D becoming a Christian. Many of the same sort of comments were floating around, and I don't think it has to do with people having a lack of grace so much as just we have this like culture of people just throwing out their opinions on the internet without any thought, just because that's what people do nowadays.
Yeah.
There's no care taken to how we communicate. There's no self-awareness in terms of what is it going to look like if I communicate this thought that I'm having right now, kind of a thing. It's just, I have this thought, vomit it out onto the internet and without a second to waste, kind of a thing. I think that's all it is. It's just people, it's just internet nonsense. because the sort of anonymity of the internet has kind of trained people, among other things, but I think anonymity has a lot to do with it, as that people have just sort of been trained to just sort of vomit their thoughts out in whatever, the moment they have them, instead of taking care to communicate in a thoughtful manner.
Yeah, and I would take that as a word of warning and a word of consideration to the folks out there, because if you're somebody who, like me, is saying like wants to make a positive difference in the culture, that's something you really got to be careful of. You can't just say the first thing that comes to your mind. I'm guilty of it for sure in a lot of some aspects of my life, but especially when in terms of just, I don't know, talking to somebody. You don't just want to blurt it out in public, and you don't want to blurt it out on the internet. It's just not, the anonymity brings a very comfortable layer blanket to somebody to just rant about stuff. I see people on Instagram stories do this all the time, and I'm like, God, don't you have any fact of self-awareness? Like, geez, like, come on. Like, and it's partly because a lot of these folks are young. They don't know any better. But there's some folks where I'm like, you probably should know better than that. Like, come on. So.
Yeah, and part of it too is, you got a lot of people who just crave attention nowadays, and so they don't even care whether they look like a fool for posting something online. They just do it because it gets them attention. It gets them that those likes, those comments, those retweets or repost shares, stuff that they crave, just because they're desperate for attention. I think a lot of the TikTokers crying to the camera over the results of the election had to do with that. It's like these people look like absolute idiots, but they don't care that they look like idiots because all they want is the attention.
I mean, it's also about perspective. Your reality is basically based on your perspective of things. It's detrimental to the aspect of your worldview, whether you live in reality or not. And that makes me think of, I can't remember what it's from, but it's like pants on the ground. You look like a fool with your pants on the ground. I can't remember what that's from, but but it reminds me of that, because it's like, what are you guys doing? Have some self-awareness. You're a grown-up. Act like it. Like, come on. So that's pretty much all I have for you, David. That's basically everything I wanted to go over. But what do you think? Any words of wisdom you would like to share, or anything you'd like to comment over the Bible in terms of the changing the minds of Joe Rogan and Elon Musk, and what do you think of the final thoughts of these folks kind of realizing the truth and they're on the path to it? Do you have any final words on that?
If I had to give some parting words of wisdom, they would be, I think, never eat soggy waffles. That's my my advice to everybody out there, is never eat soggy waffles.
Yeah, and that's really true. Soggy waffles are terrible. They're really bad. So before we leave you today, I do want to go over just a few things that inspired me to write this. I was up late. I started playing a game when I got home last night called Pseudo Regalia is how it's pronounced. It's PSEU, Pseudo Regalia. It's a weird 3D PS1 style platformer on Steam for $7. And I just was very smitten with it in terms of it being a Metroidvania and how it could have been on the PS1 or N64 or whatever. Delightfully charmful, cheap game that's short and sweet. So I started playing that. I was like so enamored by it. And then I switched over to Half-Life 2 while I was listening to Sean Bolz's podcast, which is a very interesting mixture, don't get me wrong. But after mulling some of the thoughts over in my mind about the podcast I was listening to, I sat back down at my computer after taking a shower, and I listened to, I was trying to get in the mood to write because I'm like, I feel like I need to write this down. And so I actually listened to your version of Fall Afresh, David, that you recorded. I thought that was really great. And I listened to Talking to the Moon by Bruno Mars as well, which are quite a pair. I think that, yes, that song Talking to the Moon is talking about, somebody and their loved one and them missing them, obviously. But I feel like when you look at it from a different lens, it could be a person talking to God or something. I think that it's a very beautiful song too. So you got me in the mood to write, as well as Colossians 3, reading through that as well. So I don't know. Those are the things that inspired me to write this, as random as they are. So I thought I'd share that with you in the audience. And with that, we want to thank you for listening to episode 41 of the Snarp Fangle Podcast. We'll catch you on the flip side, and Snarp Fangle on.
Bye-bye now.